I secretly conditioned my crush to like me. 10 years later, we're married. He still doesn't know. I know this sounds like something out of a bad teen rom-com, but I swear every word is true. I've never told anyone this story, not even my closest friends, because it makes me sound a little unhinged. But here we are. My husband is asleep next to me, breathing softly, and I'm finally ready to confess to the internet that I kind of conditioned him to like me. Like a lab rat. Or a very handsome golden retriever. I guess it started when I was 16. I was a junior, and he was in my AP psychology class. For the sake of anonymity, I'll call him Jake. He was the type of guy everyone liked, friendly, effortlessly funny, captain of the soccer team without being a jerk about it. The kind of guy who would walk into a room and somehow make everyone feel like they mattered. I was the girl who sat in the second row, took color-coded notes, and pretended I wasn't crushing on him so hard my chest hurt. I don't think he even knew my name at first. We were in different social orbits. He had a group of loud, athletic friends who always congregated in the courtyard, and I had my little nerd pod that studied flashcards during lunch. But then we got paired up for a project on learning theories. I remember feeling like my brain short-circuited when the teacher called out our names together. He turned around in his seat, smiled this easy, lopsided grin, and said, "Hey, sorry, I don't think we've officially met." "You're Claire," I squeaked. God. I still cringe thinking about how squeaky I sounded. He didn't seem to notice. He just said, "Nice to meet you, Claire," like he actually meant it. And that was it. That's the moment I decided I'd do anything to spend more time with him. Anything. The project was on Pavlov's classical conditioning, how dogs were trained to salivate at the sound of a bell because they associated it with food. The irony is not lost on me. We met up after school in the library to plan our presentation. He was more interested in flipping through a sports magazine while I drafted our slides, but he was polite about it. At some point, he mentioned offhand that he always bought sour gummy worms from the vending machine when he needed a pick-me-up. The idea didn't hit me right away. But a few nights later, I was in my room highlighting a paragraph about conditioned responses when something clicked. What if I could train Jake to associate me with feeling happy, relaxed, rewarded? What if every time he felt stressed or tired, I was the one who gave him that little burst of comfort? It sounds manipulative, and maybe it was. But I was 16, hopelessly infatuated, and high on the idea that I might finally have a chance with him. So I decided to try it, just as a little experiment. If it didn't work, no harm done. If it did, well, I'd cross that bridge when I got there. The first step was simple. The next day, before our project session, I stopped at the gas station and bought a pack of sour gummies. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might crack my ribs. When I walked into the library, he was already there, slumped over the table, groaning about how exhausted he was from soccer practice. I took a deep breath, pulled the bag from my backpack, and slid it across the table. "I remembered you said you liked these," I mumbled. He looked up, blinking like he couldn't process it. Then he smiled, this huge, genuine smile that made my stomach flip. "No way. You are literally a lifesaver." I tried to act casual, but inside I was doing victory laps. He ripped open the bag and popped one into his mouth, sighing like it was the best thing he'd ever tasted. We spent the next hour working on our slides. Every time he reached for another gummy, he'd look at me and smile again. When I went home that night, I felt like I'd discovered fire. I knew it was just a small gesture, but something about the way he looked at me had changed, even if it was microscopic. He seemed warmer. Like maybe I wasn't invisible after all. I told myself it was probably nothing, that I shouldn't read into it. But deep down, I was already planning my next move. After that first day with the sour gummies, I spent the whole night replaying every second. I kept wondering if I'd imagined the way he smiled at me, if I was projecting feelings onto him that weren't there. But the next morning in class, when he walked past my desk, he paused. Just a second. He gave me a little nod and said, "Hey, Claire," like we were actually friends. My heart felt like it would explode. I decided right then that I'd keep going. Just to see if this conditioning thing really worked. I wasn't thinking about ethics or whether it was fair. I was 16 and in love, and rational thought was not my strong suit. The next phase of my plan was to pair myself with more things he liked. I made a mental list of everything I'd ever heard him say he enjoyed: sour gummies, mint gum, that citrusy body spray all the soccer guys used after practice, the strokes, the smell of clean laundry. It was weird how much I'd absorb just from eavesdropping in class or watching him walk by. I felt like I was compiling a case study on my own crush. I started small. The day after the gummies, I sat next to him in the library again and offered him a piece of mint gum. He laughed, a little surprised, and said, "You're really coming through with the snacks, huh?" I shrugged, trying to look casual while my face burned. The next time we met up, I made sure to wear a light citrus body mist I'd found at the drugstore. When I walked in, he looked up and said, "You always smell good. Like, fresh." I mumbled something incoherent and wrote that down later in my notebook under observation, positive response to scent. I know how crazy it sounds. But at the time, it felt like I was onto something huge. I started keeping track of everything. When he smiled, when he seemed tired, when he perked up after I offered something. I had a whole section of my spiral notebook labeled conditioning data. If anyone had found it, they would have thought I was an actual stalker. Honestly, sometimes I thought that about myself. But then he'd thank me or lean a little closer, and all my guilt would dissolve into this warm, fizzy hope. One afternoon, about 2 weeks into the project, we were sitting together at our usual table. He was hunched over his notes, grumbling about how he was going to fail the psychology exam. I saw my chance. "You won't fail," I told him. "You're smart. You just overthink it." He looked up, surprised. "You really think so?" "Yeah," I said. My voice felt steadier than I expected. "You always get it right in the end. You just need to stop doubting yourself." He was quiet for a second, then smiled. Not just polite this time, real, a little shy. "Thanks, Claire. Honestly, you're really nice." That night, I wrote in my notebook, compliment plus encouragement equals positive effect. I was in so deep I couldn't even see the edge anymore. And part of me didn't care. Because it was working. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, he was warming up to me. The next day, when he walked into class, he spotted me right away. He actually came over and sat on the edge of my desk, chatting while we waited for the teacher. My friends watched from their desks with wide eyes. After he left, one of them leaned over and whispered, "Since when are you two friends?" I didn't know what to say. Because the truth was, we weren't friends. Not really. I was orchestrating something behind the scenes that he didn't know about. And that thought made my stomach twist. But I told myself it was harmless. I wasn't tricking him into liking someone he didn't know, I was just highlighting the best parts of me. Associating myself with positive feelings. That was okay, right? The line between harmless and manipulative was starting to blur. But at 16, I was too wrapped up in the rush of it all to stop. The next couple of weeks were a blur of tiny victories. Every day, I found some new opportunity to reinforce the connection I was trying to build. A mint here, a compliment there, always with the same body spray and the same warm smile. It was like setting up little tripwires of affection, waiting for him to stumble into them. He started sitting next to me in class, even when he didn't have to. Sometimes he'd come into the library early, just to save me a seat. Every time that happened, I'd feel this ridiculous surge of pride, like my plan was a science experiment that was finally paying off. I know it sounds insane, maybe it was, but I kept telling myself it wasn't hurting anyone. I wasn't forcing him to do anything. I was just creating an environment where he felt good when he was with me. One Friday after school, we were working on our project slides when he rubbed his temples and let out a long sigh. "God, I'm wiped," he groaned. Practice was brutal today. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small bottle of Gatorade. I hadn't planned on giving it to him right then, but it felt right in the moment. His eyes lit up when he saw it. "You're unreal," he said, grinning. "Seriously, you think of everything." My heart stuttered. "It's nothing." "No," he said, shaking his head. "It's not nothing. You're, like, the nicest person I know." I felt my face go hot, and I busied myself pretending to rearrange my papers so he wouldn't see. Inside, I was buzzing. It was working. The lines I'd drawn in my notebook, stimulus, response, reward, they were turning into real moments. Real feelings. Over the weekend, I started thinking about the ethics of it all. I'd always been a good kid, never cheated on a test, never lied to my parents about where I was going. But this? This was something else. I was deliberately influencing his emotions. If the roles were reversed, would I feel betrayed? The question haunted me. I even drafted a long, confessional text to him on Sunday night, but I deleted it before I could hit send. I told myself again that it was harmless. I wasn't pretending to be someone I wasn't. I was just being extra kind. Extra thoughtful. Extra consistent. Maybe that wasn't manipulation, maybe that was just liking someone enough to show up for them. That Monday, he waved me over to his lunch table. I froze for a second, genuinely unsure if he was talking to me. But he gestured again, smiling. "Come on," he called. "We've got space." My heart pounded so hard I thought everyone could hear it. My friends shot me looks of open-mouthed shock. I made myself walk over, trying to seem casual even though my knees were shaking. His friends nodded politely, a little curious but not unkind. I sat down next to him, clutching my lunch bag like a life raft. That whole period, he kept pulling me into the conversation, asking what I thought about the game on Friday, teasing me gently when I said I didn't know the rules. Every time he laughed at something I said, I felt this bright flare of disbelief. It was happening. I was becoming part of his world. But that night, lying in bed, the guilt came creeping back. Was he sitting with me because he actually liked me? Or because I'd trained him to associate me with feeling good? Would he have noticed me at all if I hadn't engineered it? The truth was, I didn't know. And part of me was terrified to find out. The next day, something shifted. We were walking out of class together when he said, "You know, I'm glad we got paired up for this project. I feel like, I don't know, you're easy to be around." It was such a simple thing. But my chest felt like it cracked open. I mumbled something awkward, too flustered to form a real sentence. That night, I wrote in my notebook. Observation: he is starting to seek out my company even outside planned interactions. Hypothesis: positive associations are taking root. I closed the notebook and buried it under a stack of textbooks, feeling like I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. But I also knew I wasn't going to stop. I was in too deep, and part of me was thrilled. By the time our psychology project was due, I'd memorized every pattern in his behavior. I knew which days he'd be in a good mood, after a win. Which days he'd be stressed, before a big game, and exactly how to time my little gestures so they'd land the hardest. Sometimes I'd catch myself rehearsing conversations in the mirror. It was pathetic, but I didn't care. I'd never felt this close to anyone, and even if it was all built on these calculated moves, it felt real in the moment. When we presented our project, he actually turned to the class and said, "Claire did most of the work, she's a genius. I just tried to keep up." Everyone laughed, but my heart was hammering. Later, our teacher stopped me in the hallway and said, "He's lucky to have such a thoughtful partner." I almost blurted out the truth, that he wasn't just my partner for the project, that I was basically running a months-long social experiment on him. But I swallowed it. No one would have understood. After that presentation, things kept accelerating. He started texting me first. Just little things. Asking about homework, telling me he'd gotten an A on a quiz, sometimes sending a picture of something dumb in the cafeteria with the caption, "This made me think of you." I screenshotted every text and saved them in a folder on my desktop called Progress. I cringe admitting that, but it's the truth. One afternoon, he asked if I'd stay after school to help him study for the psych final. We met in the library, like always. He looked exhausted, hair damp from practice, eyes ringed with shadows. I dug into my bag and handed him a fresh bottle of Gatorade and a little packet of gummies. He just stared at them for a second, then at me. "You know," he said slowly, "it's kinda wild how you always know exactly what I need." I tried to laugh it off. "It's not that hard. You're pretty predictable." "Yeah," he said, his smile going soft. "But no one else pays attention." That lodged itself in my chest like a splinter. He didn't say it accusingly. More like he was genuinely surprised anyone bothered. I thought about all the times I'd watched him in the hallway, surrounded by people, and assumed he was never lonely. Maybe he was. Maybe that's why this was working. That night, I didn't even try to rationalize it. I knew what I was doing. I knew it wasn't entirely innocent. But for the first time, I wondered if part of the reason he was responding was because he needed someone, anyone, to look at him like he mattered beyond soccer scores and popularity. It made me want to keep going even more. Over the next few weeks, he started finding reasons to linger after class. He'd wait for me by the door, walk me to my next period, sometimes even carry my books like it was 1950. The first time he did that, I almost laughed out loud. It was so absurdly sweet I didn't know what to do with it. My friends kept giving me these wide-eyed looks like I'd won some impossible lottery. One afternoon, when he dropped me off at my locker, he hesitated like he wanted to say something. I felt my pulse skitter. Was this it? Was he going to ask me out? My mouth went dry. Instead, he reached out and tugged gently on the strap of my backpack. "Hey," he said. "You know you're pretty great, right?" I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. My brain just short-circuited. He smiled, a little sheepish, then turned and walked away before I could gather myself. I stood there, clutching the locker door, replaying it over and over. "You're pretty great. You're pretty great." That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, feeling equal parts exhilarated and guilty. I had wanted this, dreamed about it, but now that it was happening, part of me wondered if it was really me he liked. Or if it was just the feelings I'd engineered around me. It didn't matter. Not right then. Because for the first time in my life, the boy I liked was finally looking back at me the same way. And I wasn't ready to let that go. Spring turned into summer, and the end of junior year started creeping up on us. Everyone was buzzing about prom, college visits, summer jobs. Meanwhile, all I could think about was him. By then, we were talking every day. Sometimes he'd text me late at night about the dumbest things, a movie he'd watched, a song he'd heard, a weird dream he'd had. And every time my phone lit up with his name, I felt this nervous thrill that made it impossible to sleep. At some point, I started to wonder if he felt it too. If the association was so strong that he'd begun to crave that little hit of serotonin whenever he thought of me. That was the part that scared me the most, not that I'd tricked him into liking me, exactly, but that I'd become his emotional comfort in a way I couldn't untangle from my own real feelings. One afternoon in May, he asked if I wanted to hang out after school. "Just to chill," he said. "Not homework or anything." The way he looked at me when he said it, like he was a little nervous, made my stomach flip. We ended up walking to a coffee shop near campus. He bought an iced tea and I got a lemonade, and we sat at a wobbly little table by the window. It felt normal. Easy. Like maybe this was just what it looked like, two people who liked each other. I kept waiting for the guilt to rush in, but it didn't. Not that time. Halfway through our drinks, he said, "Can I ask you something kind of weird?" "Sure," I said, trying not to show how my hands were shaking. "Did you ever, plan this?" He gestured between us, his cheeks going pink. "Us hanging out?" "I don't know. I feel like you always know exactly what to say. Or what I need. It's kind of amazing." My heart almost stopped. For a second I thought he knew. That he'd somehow figured out I'd been conditioning him like Pavlov's dog. But he just looked embarrassed, like he thought he'd said too much. I took a slow breath and forced myself to smile. "I guess I just pay attention," I said carefully. "That's all." He didn't say anything, but he reached across the table and brushed his fingers against mine. Just once. It was the smallest gesture, but it felt like the earth tilted under me. After that day, everything sped up. He started waiting for me after school even when we didn't have plans. He'd text me good luck before tests. Sometimes he'd find little excuses to touch my hand or brush my shoulder. My friends were convinced we were about to start dating. So was I. The night before finals, he called me out of nowhere. I was sitting cross-legged on my bed, surrounded by flashcards, when my phone buzzed. I almost didn't answer because I was so startled. When I picked up, he sounded tired but happy. "Hey," he said. "I just wanted to hear your voice." My chest squeezed so tight I thought I might actually cry. "Oh," I managed. "Hi. Is that weird?" he asked, his voice dropping to a quiet, almost shy register. "No," I whispered. "It's not weird." We talked for almost 2 hours. About everything and nothing, summer plans, his little sister, the way he was scared he wouldn't get into his top college. He told me he liked that I never made him feel like he had to be on. That he could just be himself. I think that was the moment I realized this wasn't just about the gummies or the compliments or the perfume. Sure, those things had opened the door. But whatever was happening now, this closeness, this feeling like we'd known each other forever, that was real. At least, I hoped it was. When we hung up, he said, "Good night, Claire." And there was this warmth in his voice I'd never heard before. I stared at the ceiling after I put the phone down, heart racing, wondering if maybe, just maybe, this was the part where I stopped needing a plan. Finals week came and went in a haze of caffeine, late-night texts, and a kind of tentative hope I didn't dare say out loud. After the last exam, people scattered to their summer plans, but he stayed behind in the hallway to wait for me. I'll never forget how he looked, sunburnt from soccer practice, hair rumpled, grinning like he couldn't help it. He shifted his backpack higher on his shoulder and said, "So, are you doing anything tonight?" I probably stared too long before answering. My brain just stopped functioning. No. Not really. Cool, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. Wanna come to my house? My mom's ordering pizza. We can hang out. If you'd told me 6 months earlier that this would happen, I would have laughed you out of the room. But there it was, my crush inviting me over, like it was the most normal thing in the world. I texted my mom that I'd be late and followed him out to the parking lot. My hands were sweating so badly I had to wipe them on my jeans. He unlocked his car and waited while I got in, like he was worried I might change my mind. The whole drive, he kept glancing at me, like he was trying to figure something out. At a red light, he said, "You know, it's kinda wild how this year turned out." "Yeah?" I said, my voice shaky. "I mean," he hesitated, then laughed under his breath. "I don't know. I didn't expect to meet someone who'd get me like you do." I pressed my palms against my knees so he wouldn't see them trembling. "I'm glad," I whispered. And I meant it. Even if I'd started this whole thing as an experiment, there was nothing fake about how much I cared now. At his house, his mom greeted me with a warm smile and offered me a soda. We sat on the couch with pizza boxes between us, making fun of the cheesy action movie he insisted I had to see. Every so often, our knees would bump, and neither of us would move away. Halfway through the movie, he looked over and said, "Hey." "Yeah?" He didn't answer right away. Just reached out and tucked a piece of hair behind my ear. My heart was beating so loud I couldn't hear the TV anymore. "You're really important to me," he said quietly. I just thought you should know." I didn't trust my voice enough to respond. So I nodded, hoping he could see everything I wanted to say. The rest of the night felt dreamlike. When he drove me home, he walked me to my door and hugged me, this long, lingering hug that made every cell in my body light up. I went inside feeling like I was floating. But later, when I was alone in my room, that old question crept back in. Was this real? Or had I just set so many little traps of kindness that he couldn't help but fall in? I thought about telling him the truth, how I'd planned everything, how I'd practically orchestrated every step of our friendship. But the idea of watching his face change, of him realizing he'd been trained, made me feel sick. So I didn't say anything. I told myself it didn't matter anymore. That what we had now had outgrown the experiment. I wanted to believe that so badly. The rest of the summer, we were inseparable. He'd text me good morning. We'd meet up for lunch. Sometimes he'd stop by my house just to sit on the porch and talk. My parents were a little confused at first. They'd never even heard his name before this year, but they liked him. Everyone did. One evening in late July, we were sitting in the park, eating ice cream and watching the sky turn pink. He was quiet, picking at the edge of his cone. I asked if something was wrong. He looked up at me, cheeks flushed, and said, "I think I'm in love with you." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My heart felt like it was going to tear itself apart. "I don't expect you to say it back," he said quickly. "I just needed you to know." I didn't even think before I blurted, "I love you too." And it was the truth. No experiments. No calculations. Just me. That was the moment everything changed. After that night in the park, it felt like the dam had broken. We didn't have to dance around it anymore, what we were, what we felt. He started introducing me as his girlfriend. The first time he did it, at a friend's bonfire, I almost cried. I remember him sliding his arm around my waist so naturally, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Like he couldn't remember a time he hadn't done it. When people asked how we started dating, he'd always laugh and say, "She was just always there for me." He had no idea how literal that was. I tried to let myself be happy. I told myself that the way he looked at me now, the way he held my hand, or kissed my forehead, wasn't something you could fake with a few bags of candy and compliments. But some nights, I'd lie awake replaying the earliest days of our friendship. I'd wonder if any of it would have happened if I hadn't made that first move. If I hadn't decided to test Pavlov's theories on the boy I couldn't stop thinking about. He was so open with me, in ways I'd never expected. He told me about the pressure he felt to be perfect all the time, about how everyone assumed he was confident when he was really scared people would find out he wasn't as put together as he looked. I'd stroke his hair and whisper that he was enough exactly as he was. And he'd smile at me like I was the only person who'd ever told him that. We had our first real fight in August, over something stupid. He forgot we had plans to see a movie and went to a pickup game instead. I was embarrassed by how much it hurt. I knew it wasn't really about the movie. It was about that gnawing fear that if I wasn't always there, always perfect, he'd forget why he liked me at all. When he showed up at my house later, sweaty and apologetic, I almost didn't open the door. But then he said, "I don't know why I'm such an idiot sometimes. I don't ever want to screw this up." And something in me unclenched. We sat on the porch steps while the cicadas buzzed, and I realized that the way he needed me now wasn't about conditioning anymore. Or at least, not only about conditioning. It was about the hundreds of hours we'd spent talking, the way he trusted me with parts of himself no one else saw. That fall, when senior year started, it was almost surreal. He'd walk me to class, kiss me goodbye in the hallway, and everyone just accepted that we were a couple. My friends still teased me about how fast it had happened. Sometimes they'd ask, "When did you even start liking each other?" I never had a good answer. How could I explain that the first real spark had come from a pack of sour gummies and a meticulously timed compliment? One night, we were sitting on the hood of his car, looking up at the stars, when he said, "You know what's weird? I don't really remember when I started falling for you. It's like, one day I just knew." I laughed, a little too high-pitched, because if only he knew. If he ever found my old notebook, the one with all my little observations, I don't know what he'd think. But he didn't know. And he never asked. That winter, he got accepted to his first-choice college. I was so happy for him I cried. He hugged me so tight I thought my ribs would crack. "You're coming with me, right?" he asked, his voice muffled against my hair. "We'll figure it out." I nodded because I couldn't trust myself to speak. In the back of my mind, I still wondered, if I hadn't done any of it, if I'd never made those moves, would he be holding me like this now? But then he kissed me, slow and careful, and I decided it didn't matter anymore. Because whatever had started this, it was real now. And it was ours. Senior year felt like a countdown. Every milestone, prom, finals, graduation, was tinged with this bittersweet ache. I was excited about the future, but part of me was terrified that once we left the bubble of high school, everything would fall apart. When we walked into prom together, everyone turned to look. He had his arm around me, my hand resting against the smooth fabric of his suit jacket, and for one dizzying moment, I thought about how none of this had been an accident. He leaned in close and murmured, "You look incredible." And all my guilt melted for a few precious hours. We danced until my feet hurt. He kept his hand pressed against the small of my back, like he was afraid I'd disappear if he let go. When they played our song, well, technically his favorite song that I'd played over and over when we studied together, I felt tears sting my eyes. Because I knew I'd been the one to create that association. I'd linked that song to safety, to happiness, to me. And now it was our anthem. After prom, we drove to the overlook outside town. The place where he'd first told me he loved me. We sat on the hood of his car, the cool night air wrapped around us, and he traced lazy circles on my knee with his thumb. "You know," he said, voice hushed, "I still don't get how you knew exactly what I needed all the time." I swallowed hard. I just paid attention. He looked at me with so much softness it almost broke me. "You made me feel like I mattered. Like I was more than the guy everyone expected me to be." I pressed my lips together so I wouldn't blurt out the truth. That I'd made charts and lists. That I'd mapped every smile, every small win, every moment he seemed to light up around me. That I'd practically engineered the way he looked at me now. But then he kissed me, and for that moment, none of it mattered. Graduation came and went. He gave me a bouquet of yellow roses, my favorite, and whispered, "We did it." Everyone was taking pictures, hugging, crying. My parents said they'd never seen me so happy. We spent the whole summer in this suspended state, halfway between kids and adults. He'd drive over late at night to sit on my porch swing and talk about the future. Sometimes he'd confess he was scared he'd lose me once we got to college. "Not gonna happen," I'd tell him, and he'd smile like he believed it. In August, we moved into our dorms, different buildings, but the same campus. I'd worried that the spell would break once we weren't in the same school all day. But if anything, we grew closer. He'd walk me to class, text me between lectures, come over to my dorm to study. One night, When we were sprawled out on my tiny dorm bed with our legs tangled together, he traced a finger over my wrist and said, "You're it for me, you know." I held my breath. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you're my person," he said softly. "I don't ever want to do this life without you." I thought about all the little steps that had brought us here. The sour gummies, the mint gum, the carefully timed encouragements. And I wondered again if he'd feel the same if I hadn't orchestrated it all. But lying there with him, his heart beating steady against my cheek, I decided it didn't matter. Because whatever I'd set in motion, it had turned into something real. Something bigger than my teenage experiments. That night, as he drifted off to sleep, I whispered, "I love you." He didn't open his eyes, but he squeezed my hand. "I love you too," he murmured. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty at all. If you'd asked me back then, when I was 19 and so sure we were unbreakable, I would have told you I'd finally made peace with how it started. That the guilt was gone. But it wasn't. Not really. It came in waves. Some days, I could look at him and feel nothing but warmth. Other times, usually late at night when the world got too quiet, I'd replay every step like a reel of evidence. Proof that I'd manipulated someone into loving me. There was one evening during sophomore year of college when the guilt hit me so hard I thought I'd be sick. We were studying for midterms in the library. He was slumped over his laptop, hair falling into his eyes. I'd brought him his favorite iced coffee, something I did so often it had become a ritual. He looked up at me with this soft, tired smile and said, "You always know exactly what I need." I smiled back, but inside, I felt my stomach twist. Because I did know. I'd made it my mission to know. Every preference, every trigger, every way to make him feel safe. He had no idea that I'd started doing it on purpose. That it hadn't been organic, at least not at first. After he went home that night, I sat alone in my dorm, staring at the wall. I thought about telling him everything. Showing him the old notebooks I still kept hidden in a box under my bed. Part of me imagined he'd laugh it off, or maybe think it was sweet. But another part, the part that always flinched at the idea, wondered if he'd look at me like I was a stranger. I opened the box and leafed through the pages. My teenage handwriting looked so small and meticulous. Observation: he smiles when I compliment him after practice. Hypothesis: positive reinforcement increases attachment. I pressed my palm flat against the paper and closed my eyes. If I was being honest, I didn't know anymore where the conditioning ended and the real feelings began. I told myself it didn't matter. That we'd built so many memories, so much real love on top of that shaky foundation, that it had turned into something solid. But sometimes I wondered if I'd built the whole thing out of smoke. Even so, I couldn't bring myself to regret it. Because every time he touched my face or held me like he was afraid to let go, it felt real. And wasn't that the point? There were little moments that still haunted me. Like the time he admitted he'd never felt that drawn to anyone before me. He'd said it with this sweet bewilderment, as if it was fate. And maybe it was fate, or maybe it was because I'd spent months linking my presence to everything that made him feel good. The worst part was that I loved him so much more now than I ever could have predicted when I was 16, sitting in the library plotting my little experiment. I loved the way he always offered me the last fry. The way he called his grandma every Sunday. The way he sang under his breath when he thought no one was listening. None of those things had anything to do with conditioning. Those were just him. So why couldn't I let myself believe he loved me for me, and not for the 100 tiny cues I'd planted? Some nights, I'd lie awake listening to his breathing when he slept over, feeling the guilt press into my chest like a weight. And then he'd roll over, pull me closer, and mumble, "Love you," like it was the most natural thing in the world. And just like that, the guilt would slip away for a little while. I didn't know if I'd ever be completely free of it. But I knew one thing for sure. Even if I could go back and erase everything, the gummies, the compliments, the careful orchestration, I wouldn't. Because no matter how it started, I wouldn't trade what we had for anything. If you'd told 16-year-old me that I'd eventually marry the boy I'd been so obsessed with, I think I would have fainted on the spot. But here we are. A decade later, I'm lying in bed typing this, and he's next to me, breathing slow and steady in the dark. His hair is a little thinner at the temples now. He still leaves his socks everywhere. He still orders the same sour gummies when he's stressed. And I still love him with an intensity that sometimes feels bigger than my own body. We've built a whole life together, first apartments with mismatched furniture, cross-country moves, a tiny wedding with only our families. Everyone thought it was romantic that we'd been together since high school. They didn't know about the notebook hidden in the back of my closet, the one I can never quite bring myself to throw away. They didn't know that in the beginning, I'd been half scientist, half girl in love. That I'd deliberately linked my presence to everything that made him feel comforted, happy, understood. Sometimes I look at him and feel a pang of guilt so strong it makes my throat ache. He has no idea he was ever part of an experiment. He thinks we just found each other. That it was fate, or timing, or the universe doing us a favor. And maybe that's partly true. Because no matter how carefully I planned those early steps, nothing could have forced him to stay. Nothing could have made him hold my hand through every disaster, or whisper, "I'm proud of you," after every success. That's what I tell myself when the guilt claws up my spine, that eventually, what we had became real. It outgrew the sticky little tactics and turned into something neither of us could have predicted. I never did tell him. I still don't know if I ever will. Part of me worries it would feel like a betrayal, even though the girl who started all this is so far removed from the woman I am now. I've thought about it more lately, maybe because we've been talking about starting a family. About what it means to build something honest, to love someone without caveats. But then he rolls over in his sleep, drapes an arm across my waist, and lets out this soft, contented sigh. And I think, if this is the result of my teenage experiment, I don't regret it. Because the truth is, I did love him. Even when it started as an idea, I loved him. And that love only grew deeper every year we spent together. So maybe I was manipulative. Maybe I crossed a line. But looking back, I'm not sure I'd change a thing. Because this life. This man who still makes my heart beat faster after all these years, is worth every awkward, guilty, wonderful step that led us here. I guess that's my confession. If he ever stumbles across this post and recognizes himself, maybe he'll think I was crazy. Maybe he'll be mad. But I hope, more than anything, that he'll understand. Because if I learned anything from all those notebooks and theories, it's that you can't fake what grows in the space between two people who see each other, really see each other. And whatever I started all those years ago, it turned into something real. Something I wouldn't trade for anything. Thanks for sticking around to the end of this story. Seriously, what a ride. From a teenage crush and a psychology experiment to a marriage built on a little bit of strategy and a whole lot of real love.